everybody, welcome to Cigars and Syndication, where we're passionate about cigars and real estate. I'm Robbie Rogers. I'm here with Jay Noir, and today we're going to smoke a wonderful cigar and talk about whether is it becoming a privilege to buy a home.
Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Junaid Noor. Welcome to Cigars and Syndications. And it's been a long week, and I'm just kind of very relaxed. So if I just stop speaking somewhere along the line and just kind of do this, don't hold it against me.
It's almost Friday. You can make it.
Yes, it is Friday Eve, so yes, we'll do it. But anyway, we are smoking this Byron Reserva 5 Anos. Uh, Byron is a very boutique brand of cigars. Not a lot of people know about it. Uh, this one is a particular special. It's a special blend, and as soon as I lit it up, I got spice. What did you get?
Yeah, I got some really good spices, really flavorful, good full smoke, and I'd like to thank you for bringing this, Byron. These are really a boutique cigar and not readily available everywhere. This is a treat. Thank you.
Now, I've had this cigar in my humidor for about maybe 4 years, and I'm smoking it. But the first time I smoked it, as soon as I lit it, I got this really nice blueberry flavor. Um, but I'm not getting at that this time around, and I'm wondering it's just because of its aging.
Yeah, I've not gotten that yet, but hopefully it'll pop up soon.
So, is it a privilege to buy a house in the United States? You know, since World War II, uh, the government has set up agencies to focus on, um, to help Americans buy the home, buy a home for themselves to live in, right? That's like the American dream, right? Buy your own and own your own house. And to that extent, right after World War II, when the baby boomers started expanding out into the suburbs, the Eisenhower President Eisenhower started putting in the interstate system, which allowed us to move out of the center of the cities into the suburbs. It's always been a, a goal of every American to buy and own their own home. As immigrants, my parents didn't buy their first home until 1991. I was 21 years old. I was already almost done with college, and that's when they were able to afford enough down payment to be able to buy their first home.
Yeah, I mean with the higher interest rates, the game is definitely changing the face of home ownership. I think that it is increasingly becoming more of a privilege to own a home. There's some things happening in the market. There's the BTR concepts coming along. I think that is a result of higher interest rates. That's impacting what people can afford.
And it's also a matter of, and we've discussed this in previous podcasts, a matter of a shortage of home supply. Developers are not building homes fast enough. A lot of it has to do with what happened back in 2008, 2006. If you go back to one of our podcasts, we talk about the history of why we are where we are as in a short housing supply market. But I know that in Texas, 500,000 people a year are moving in.
Yeah, they had a lot of new incoming people moving to Texas, and these people aren't selling houses and buying houses in Texas. They're selling a house somewhere else, coming to Texas, buying a house, which really hurts the supply and demand.
Right. And so what it is that, someone like myself, I used to live in Chicago, or someone in California, or someone in New York, and they're selling a $900,000 house, and they're coming in and they're paying full price for the houses in Texas because what do they care? They're going to just, they're going to buy a house for $350,000, almost, a third of the cost of what they sold their house for in a Chicago or a California. So that's one other aspect to why we have a housing shortage. The developers are not building fast enough. Existing homes are going off the market very quickly because of out of state buyers. And then investors. there's a lot of money out there where investors are buying houses and putting them up for rent or putting them up as Airbnb. You know, the BTR concept you talked about. Well, the BTR concept is generally, 100 houses in one subdivision, they're all rental. But BTR is also, when it first started off, when some of the asset management companies like the Brookfield Asset Management were buying BTR, they would buy a portfolio of 100 houses from an investor, and those houses would be spread out everywhere. And they would buy that because the returns were good, and they set up their infrastructure to be able to maintain and to lease those houses out. But they didn't care what price they paid as long as they got a sufficient enough return for their investors.
Right, right. And I think that's probably how it started, or that is how it started. They were buying these houses in these neighborhoods, and leasing them out, and some of the homeowners associations, some of the developers, they keyed in on that, and maybe even changed the rules and regulations for the subdivisions, that somebody or an entity could only own one house or two houses in a subdivision, to prevent some of these groups from coming in and buying 8 or 10 houses on a street and all be rentals.
Yeah, and a lot of it did start off back in 2009, 2010. I know a buddy of mine um, was getting houses at deep, deep discounts, and he basically went all in. He actually told me that the only money I had in my account was just enough to buy groceries, because I went all in and bought all these houses at deep discounts. And now, he's sitting on a multi-million-dollar portfolio of houses that he picked up for, very, very cheap, 40% off, 30% off. And now, all the prices have gone more than doubled. So he's sitting on a big portfolio now. But a lot of these investors did that. An interesting statistic the reason we started off in this, on this podcast, an interesting statistic was that I was reading this, that the average cost of purchasing a house in the United States. So you're talking about average. You're not talking about, places like Houston where it's a little bit cheaper, or California where it's a little bit more expensive. $2,700 a month. Now, that means that $2,700 a month, if your housing ratio is 23 to 25%, that means you need to make anywhere between $129,000 to $149,000 a year in order to be able to afford a house in the United States.
Yeah, an average house.
An average house.
Yeah, that's drastically different than it was 5 years ago.
And I think there's been a change also. You were just telling me about this. There's been a change in what age people are buying their first house.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems like pre-COVID. Well, I think if we went back to 2009, the average first-time buyer was 31, and just last year in 2022, it was 36.
I was 30 years old when I purchased my first house. How old were you when you bought your first house?
I was 23.
Wow, you were way ahead of me. Yeah, I was 30 when I purchased my first house. But again, immigrant parents, my parents, I was 21 when my parents purchased their first house. So, and my parents were much older. And then, when I turned 30, I purchased my first house. But that age seems to be increasing. And one of the reasons is because the millennials, that group, that generation just got hammered. They bought their houses in, 2005, 2006, 2007 at very high values, and then everything went upside down in 2008. And so, since most Americans' net worth, the majority of their net worth is tied up in the house they live in, well, they lost a lot of net worth just because of 2008.
Well, I'm really enjoying this, Byron. It's a really good quality cigar. You can really tell that this thing is finely crafted. The burn is really great. The ash is amazing. A draw is amazing. Uh, the peppery spice is kind of winding down a little bit. I'm getting just some nice, almost a little bit of sweet moving in there. Just a really, really good smoke.
Yeah, and that sweet might be blueberry. I'm still not picking it up. as I did the first time I smoked the cigar. Uh, but the spice is winding down. I'm getting some nut, a little bit of coffee, um, and the pepper is really winding down. It's a very good smoke. It's smoking very well actually, after 3 years in my humidor or 4 years in my humidor. But yeah, it's a good smoke.
But you had mentioned earlier that the average mortgage was $2,700 a month, and you needed an average household income of about 129, $130,000, when the national average for household income is $70,000. That leads back to the question: is it a privilege? Is homeownership a privilege? And how do you go about saving the money for the down payment? How do you afford these homes?
Yeah, and that's what it's coming down to, that it is becoming a privilege, because if you're only making $70,000 in a household, and a house on average is $129,000, you need to make about $129,000. Then you can't afford a home, and you certainly can't afford a home in some of the high end areas like San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, even Chicago, New York. And that might be one of the reasons people are moving out into Texas. Uh, and Houston's no better. Houston, over the last 50 years, you can count on Houston property values for a steady 3% increase. Even in 2008, the average in Houston did not drop. So because it doesn't increase that fast, it doesn't drop that fast. But these last three years, the average property value nationwide has gone up 86%. I mean, Houston has been what, at least 50% increases, if not more, in certain areas.
Yeah, no, it's had some big jumps. Definitely not historical situation here in Houston over the last 5 years. I know that in several instances, I know certain areas are up 40, 50% in 3 or 4 years.
Right. So
And now it's pretty flat, but still not declining.
yeah, it's not declining, and 3% increases were good because they were steady, and they were easy to calculate, that you can depend. They were dependable, right? 3% increase. Um, but now Houston's gone up rapidly. Um, Maybe some of the outer towns outside of Houston, like Huntsville, or a little bit further up, further than Huntsville, those would be, I would think, a little bit more affordable.
Yeah, the further you get away from Houston, obviously the property values go down, and you've got some hot spots like Huntsville and College Station and Hockley and Manville. Those types of secondary markets are actually doing quite well in this area.
So on the flip side of it, a lot of people choose to rent because they just can't afford to buy a house right now. But even rental prices over the last 3 years, in the same time frame, house values have gone up about 86%. Rental prices have gone up about 25%, with the average rental being about $1,850.
Well, I think in the multifamily arena, you've got some leaders in that market, and they're recognizing what's happening, and they're recognizing the difficulty and the hardships in becoming a first time homeowner. And I think they're showing that with the amenities and things that they offer in their facilities, with fitness centers, yoga rooms, conference rooms, business centers, outdoor areas, dog washes. I think that the leaders in that industry are really trying to capitalize, but also offer amenities that you would have with a home.
Right. But at the end of the day, remember, if we go back and say most Americans, I would say 90% of Americans, their net worth, majority of their net worth, is tied into their home. Well, if you don't have that home, you never got the opportunity to buy that home, then your net worth is not going to increase quite as much as it did in the previous generations. And I think that's one of the reasons that millennials are the first generation whose net worth is less than the generation previous to them.
Well, and I think honestly, as the Federal Reserve looks at our situation, and that seems like they're faced with maybe one more increase, and again impacting what you can buy a home for. It'll be very interesting to see, do the home values continue to stay steady? Do they start to fall a little bit? Because right now the market still is in all of these new homes and homes that are available are in high demand. The prices seem to be holding pretty steady. It'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out and where it ends. Where does this thing put us, 2 years from now?
So the other factor of supply shortage is that a lot of people are tied into. I think the statistic that I read was 60% of homeowners are tied into a 30-year fixed mortgage under 4%. So until that interest rate starts going down, you don't have the sellers. Sellers are not going to sell. I wouldn't sell a home and get out of a 4% mortgage to get into an 8% mortgage.
Right, because the increase in quality of life is not there.
Right. Speaking of which, very interesting story. I was talking to my mother, and we rented apartments all my life. Like I said, when I was 21 is when they first bought the home, their permanent home to live in, which they still live in. My parents still live in it right now in Chicago. But I was talking to my mother, and I was like, "What were the rents like?" And you were talking about back in even 1980. You will not guess how much we paid in rent in 1980.
I have no idea.
$100 a month.
Oh my gosh, that's way less than I would have thought.
She said, it was the times were, and everybody talks about that, right? Times were so much simpler, costs were so much lower. A gallon of milk was 99 cents. A dozen donuts at Dunkin' Donuts was, 99 cents. And she's like, we paid 100. It went up a little bit, 100, 125, $150 a month in rent.
Yeah, man, it's really hard to comprehend that to where we are today.
And home buyers right now, especially the younger home buyers, are getting into the sticker shock because, honestly, if you're in your 20s or you're even in your 30s, you've never seen interest rates this high. Back in the 90s was when I was in my 20s. Let's say back in 95, 96 is when the interest rate started dropping. My parents' first home, I read the mortgage and the note, and they were paying 9.5% interest, and they were happy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it peaked in the 13-14% range in the mid 80s.
Yes, it did, and but people were still buying houses, and they would buy much smaller homes. So if you go back and you look at the houses that were built in the 80s, they were tiny. They weren't big because that's what people could afford. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting because the home buyers nowadays, especially the first time home buyers, are looking at this going, oh my God, 7% interest rates, when 9.5, 10 was the normal.
Yeah, no, this is definitely something they haven't seen, and quite honestly, I haven't seen it in a while, and it's uncomfortable. It's against my nature to be like, oh, 7%, okay, that's great.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, what do you think? Is home buying or home purchasing going to become a privilege in the United States?
I do think so. I think it's definitely a privilege and something that I think you should focus on and try to get in a position to where you could capitalize on it. But it's absolutely a privilege.
But what is going to change this, or actually what is changing this right now, is the ability to work remotely. And during COVID, a lot of these little towns in Idaho and in Montana and Wyoming started getting a big influx of people because they could get a well-priced home with, a lot of nature, away from the city, beautiful view, but they're still maybe making the salary that they were making when living in California, and they can easily afford living in a remote area, smaller town, and get that small town feeling, but still uh, get paid what they were getting paid in California.
I think remote offices, work from home, all that has made a huge impact on secondary markets and just where people can live.
It will be interesting to see how long that lasts because an article I read this week, basically Zoom, which is the the company that made its mark during COVID, Zoom is requiring all their employees to come back to the office 2 days a week.
We'll see how that goes for them.
Yeah, we will. So yeah, I mean, I think in England and Europe, home ownership is a privilege. It's very expensive. The average person can't afford it, and I think the United States is starting to head that way. And I don't see any clarity over the next 5 to 10 years that is going to reduce that. Even if the interest rates come down, um, builders are not building fast enough.
Well, I do really think that home ownership is something you should strive for, and it's a shame that the interest rates are impeding that a little bit right now. But be patient, and when it's time, don't be afraid to jump into home ownership.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you can get your hands on one of these Byrons. It's a fantastic cigar. Check us out on albanyparkcapital.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and feel free to leave some comments. Hit the resources tab on albanyparkcapital.com. We have a lot of articles, a lot of information. It's all free for everybody to read. And, leave us some comments. We'd love to know what you're thinking.
Grab a good smoke, and we'll see you next time.